Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. You're allowed to respond. That's lovely. Thank you for responding. So I have had the most wonderful day. I want to thank the school and Dorna and Christine and April and everyone who helped put this together. I've had the opportunity to meet with so many of you today, and it's been just a really inspiring day to see the kind of work that you guys are doing and to hear your ideas and see how you're throwing yourselves into the beginning of the semester. So thank you so much for tolerating me as I distracted you from your work today. I do want to admit right from the get-go that I have a little bit of an ulterior motive for being here. I'm going to be talking to you about cultural landscapes and how important I believe cultural landscapes are to the work that we do as designers and planners. And I am on a little bit of a mission to try to improve the way that cultural landscape practices are incorporated into traditional design programs. So I think it is absolutely fabulous that here at Ball State you have your historic preservation program in the same college with your design schools, and I challenge you to integrate them fully. So let's see, that's my ulterior motive. Let's see, my work focuses on cultural landscapes, and to me that it means places that have deep significance to people because of the connections that have evolved through use and activities. I graduated from the University of Kentucky with my Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture in 1988, and I worked several years with firms doing a range of work that was mostly with public clients, parks, downtown revitalizations, worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. And then I headed to the University of Wisconsin in 1992, where I got my graduate degree, and I honed my focus on the integration of cultural and natural landscape context to inform planning, design, and management. I live and work in Madison, Wisconsin, the home of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin, on a landscape that is deeply significant to Ho-Chunk people. I work hard to acknowledge and support the tribe's connections to that landscape and to tribal associations to all the places where I work. For me, this starts with seeking out understanding of the full history of each landscape, which involves learning about the living people connected to each place and hearing their perspectives of the past, their current concerns related to a place, and understanding the people's relationships to places. This expands by working with tribal representatives to incorporate their concerns into projects. And that's all in addition to a more traditional type of historical research. So I'm introducing myself to you in this way, sharing the place I belong to and a little about my background, and for my academic perspective. The reason I'm doing that is to respond to what I've learned from Indigenous advisors through my work together on a range of projects. They have taught me how important it is to properly introduce myself to people so that they can place me in their conceptualization of the world. Who my people are, the perspectives and traditions that I was raised with, provides a point of connection, and it also is a way of acknowledging my biases. So this presentation is going to explore the use of a cultural landscape approach to identify and preserve heritage, cultural fabric, and memories of people in planning and design, with a particular focus on how this can be accomplished for places associated with communities who have been excluded from design processes previously. I will use a critical lens to evaluate how we tell authentic stories of America's history and work towards a future that is healing and honest. I will highlight an approach that places women and people of color at the center of planning and design projects to serve as exemplars for how business can integrate empathy into work while also serving to address and raise awareness of our collective past. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction to cultural landscape processes, terminology, and standards. And then I'm going to use a project focused on site in St. Paul as an example of how to integrate contextual and historical information in planning and design. And use of collaboration in design to build relationships and trust, and ultimately integrate community members' ideas, concerns, and desires into solutions for enriching the future. So throughout the world, cultural landscapes are places that have acquired meaning through interactions between people and the land. As people use the land, they leave their imprint on it in the form of plants, buildings, pavement, fences, roads, events, stories, names, and collective memories. Subsequently, the land acquires historical value through its portrayal of human use. Historic landscapes are cultural resources that provide tangible links to our human past, often conveying a sense of history unparalleled by other cultural resources. Historic landscapes are not simply the backdrop to historic buildings. They are significant places in their own right. The study of cultural landscapes evolved from the fields of cultural geography, folklore, material culture studies, archaeology, anthropology, and an interest in placemaking and sacred places. Today in the United States, the National Park Service Cultural Landscapes Program is the leader in providing guidance and standards for addressing cultural landscapes. The program's website is a great place to find information at all levels, including a Cultural Landscapes 101 page, and showing my technological inabilities. I tried to get the URLs on there. Maybe I got them. I kept getting it. It kept putting something different in there than what was typed in. But if you type in National Park Service Cultural Landscapes, you're going to get close to seeing, I think you'll get to this page. And then as you scroll down this page, there are lots of different resources and links to things that you can go to. So the United States Secretary of the Interior and the National Register Program recognize 4 types of cultural landscapes. Historic designed landscapes are those consciously designed or laid out by a landscape architect, master gardener, architect, or horticulturalist according to design principles, or an amateur gardener working in a recognized style or tradition. Examples include parks, campuses, and residential complexes. And here I have to speak because it is my alma mater. This plan that you're looking at was created by the architect planning firm of Laird and Cray. They developed a master plan for the University of Wisconsin in Madison, reflecting the Beaux-Arts style, with broad open spaces, balancing masses of buildings and corridors aligned to enhance views and character. Parts of the campus still reflect this design, and current master plans integrate preservation of key characteristics that were identified by a cultural landscape study that we did over a decade ago. Historic vernacular landscapes include sites shaped by the activities or occupancy of people to the extent that the landscape reflects the physical, biological, and cultural character of the occupants' everyday lives. Examples are agricultural landscapes, rural villages, and industrial complexes. In Wisconsin, many farms reflect the activities of generations of families through patterns that are utilitarian and recognizable. Here we see vegetable fields adjacent to fence rows, a cluster of farm buildings, and a wooded hillside that includes remnant savanna plants. The hills are not good for cultivation, so native species are preserved there. Historic sites gain significance through their association with a historic event, activity, or person. Examples include battlefields, lighthouse complexes, and homes of presidents. At Split Rock Lighthouse Historic Site, located on Minnesota's north shore of Lake Superior, a complex of 9 historic buildings, historic lawns, sidewalks, and tramways reflect the development of this remote site for use by the lighthouse keeper and 2 assistant keepers 300 feet above the lake at a dangerous location on a major Great Lakes shipping corridor. Ethnographic landscapes contain natural and cultural resources that the people associated with them define as heritage resources. Examples of these include religious sacred sites and massive geological structures. Indian Mound Cemetery is a sacred site to Dakota, Ho-Chunk, and Iowa tribes. Their ancestors lived in the region and buried their family members in these mounds. And I'll talk more about Indian mounds soon. So a variety of types of projects are used to address cultural landscapes. In the United States, these adhere to the Secretary of the Interior, the National Register, and National Park Service standards and guidelines to apply an approach to developing an understanding of the history of each place, its meaning to current communities, and integrating this into creating appropriate plans and designs for the future. The most comprehensive type of document is a cultural landscape that incorporates thorough documentation and what I call a basis of design to inform recommendations for the future, which may be at a master plan level or any other level that you can think of for a design project. Trying to jam a lot into a short amount of time. That's why I'm using notes, so I hope you don't mind. So the process used is very similar to that applied by landscape architects and other designers for site analysis, with the added steps of documenting how the landscape has changed over time, developing a clear understanding of significance related to National Register and culturally affiliated standards, and evaluating integrity, which is basically comparing what was important during the period of significance to what is there today. Once this understanding has been developed, the foundation for creating recommendations for future design and management is in place. Use of the standards and collaboration with associated people and communities informs creation of solutions for the future. The incorporation of people to whom each place is significant is an important part of the process. This is done through stories and historical documentation, but it is also critical to include living community members whenever possible. As we'll see in the Indian Mounds example, the perspectives of people connected to places is primary to understanding cultural meaning so that the plans we create are relevant. As we consider cultural landscapes, we use a term that we call landscape characteristics to organize information. These are aspects of the landscape that help to categorize and organize information regarding historical and existing conditions associated with the landscape. And whether you are conducting historical research, field investigations, or interviews with stakeholders and users, these characteristics help to capture pertinent information and inform a holistic understanding of place. We also use them to organize the analysis and integrity and to develop design and management recommendations. Okay, so that was like the fastest ever grounding in some basis for cultural landscapes, because I really wanted to get to my case study here. Yay, I'm doing good. And talk to you about this really special project. So This is an example that I want to share to help illustrate ways that we integrate contextual and historical exploration of sites in planning and design projects, and give you an example of some of the collaborative design strategies that we use to engage with difficult topics and support communities toward cross-cultural understanding, reconciliation, and trust. So a really important starting place for me is understanding that every landscape is an indigenous landscape. It's really easy to forget, and it's also really easy to discount because it's very hard to account for that. But in my view, it is a fact, and not only is every landscape an indigenous landscape, but every building is part of a landscape, and every building is created from landscape components, and every project can benefit from understanding the past, the changes that have occurred, who made them, why, and how the landscape has been important to people who have used it. And I don't feel, well, the most appropriate way for us to hear about that is to hear from someone who is connected with this place. So I'm just going to share with you the voice of Maggie. Hang on a second. I know I did this before. Oh, there she is.
For a number of decades now, people in the St. Paul area who may have come from immigrant families and established homes and their lives here have related to this area, this park, as such, as a park and a recreational place. And I guess what I would welcome people to do when they come here is to take all of that history and all of those memories and all of those ways that they connected to this park and how that, what that means to them, and then try to amplify that by like 10 times. And that's how long of a relationship Dakota people have with this place, over thousands of years, and how many stories and how many generations of ancestors we have that we've laid to rest here. And so, although for the last, really what is a small period of time, the last 150 or 200 years, that this area has been treated differently than a burial site. That's how it's always been looked at as Dakota people, a sacred burial site. And so I would welcome people to kind of imagine what this place might have looked like prior to colonization, and try to imagine what it could look like being honored in that way again, and how they can help in that process.
So sorry about the segue into that. I was so nervous about it working that I didn't give you the proper introduction. Maggie was one of our collaborators on the Indian Mounds project. Sorry about that. And I wanted to share that clip with you. It's actually there's a story map online that I'll give you a link to in a little bit, but I wanted to share that clip with you because I think Maggie says it way better than I do. So the work we do is about people, and their perspectives are critical, a critical part of the base information that we need to create relevant design. Like everyone, or mostly everyone in this room, I'm a designer. And a project site may not be culturally connected to me. Matter of fact, most of the sites I work at are not places that I am culturally connected to. So there are many layers of history associated with each site, and it's really important for me to learn about them to inform decisions for the future. So every place has many voices, and listening to them expands our understanding.
For a number of decades
Yeah, we're not going to listen to her again.
People-
There we go. Okay. So back to Indian Mounds, and I wanted to just give you a sense of where we're talking about. So you can see on the screen Muncie, and you can see Indian Mounds, and in the middle is Madison, because that's where I'm from. It's about 800 miles between Muncie and Minneapolis. So if you're going to the ASLA conference in just a few weeks, that is where you're headed. So the site for our project is part of Bedote. Bedote is the place of origin and homeland for many Dakota tribes. It's at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, but it's not just one spot. It's much broader than that. There are many sites throughout the area that are important to the ongoing cultural existence of the Dakota, and those are the blue spots. And then you can see the little circle is showing you where that Indian Mounds site is. It's right at a bend and a very high cliff in the Mississippi River that's going towards that confluence. So I really love this watercolor that our partner Katie Kelly at 10 by 10 made. We were talking about context, and we were talking about how important, like, the significance of this site has to do with all those little dots that I showed you on the map, but they're not dots, and none of this is really easily defined with an edge. It's way more like flowing water. It's very conceptual and contextual, I guess. So here we are honing in on the project site, and again, you can see the white line is the part of the land that is owned and managed by the city of St. Paul. But like water that is not neatly contained by the banks drawn on a map, or the property boundary illustrated here, the sacred landscape at Indian Mounds continues well beyond those boundaries, and it spans the bluffs along the rivers and throughout the region. So that's like really important, because this significance and this tie to that broader context helps really think of, like, if you think about that, it really helps you to think about the fact that we can't really define how important this piece of land is and these mounds that are here if we don't understand all, like, how they're connected to the people and other sites. So to understand the landscape here, we started by understanding its geology. The hard rock at the bend in the Mississippi River resulted in a bluff rising above the river. This location overlooking the surrounding landscape was chosen as a sacred site of burial. It is connected to the sky above, and immediately below there is a cave, Wakantipi, where spring water comes out, and that is a sacred site of birth. So here we have a place of birth and a place of rest for ancestors of indigenous people. This is an 1840 painting by Seth Eastman, presenting his interpretation of the village of Kaposha along the floodplain and the scaffold burials above on the bluffs. In Dakota culture, all is one, and the ancestors are still present in their places of burial. Today's Dakota people are culturally obligated to care for their ancestors, and they visit them to pray and show respect and seek comfort. As part of the United States government's westward expansion initiatives, treaties, war, imprisonment, hangings, and reservations were used to thinly veil acts of genocide, and the Dakota people suffered greatly. Despite this, they are still present, and they are deeply connected to Dote. So I already talked about every place having multiple voices and stories. And we use these tools to create, we do our research and we learn information from a lot of different sources at all kinds of scales. Some are written, some are maps, some are photographs. And so we create what we call period of change diagrams or historic period diagrams to illustrate at a similar scale and at a similar graphic style how these changes have occurred over time. So here you're seeing the yellow is shading is indicating the documented locations of mounds in the study area present between 200 BC and 1837. The exact location of the mounds were documented, but our tribal partners have asked us not to show those, but they're in those areas. And in this plan, you can see roads, trails, buildings that people's homes were constructed on top of the mounds, and the earth from the mounds was spread out to create a off-ramp for the highway. So just like as an example, here's 4 different time periods, and you can just kind of look at them and see that the changes that occurred over time. This is like, I call it a cheat sheet. It's like an easy way to make this comparison of a really lot of historical research and oral history and all kinds of information from different places, but it really informs our understanding of what's there, still there today and what it might relate to. So this 1905 postcard illustrates the mounds being used for recreation with roads, paths, plantings, and other features. This park is loved by neighbors. The green space and captivating views are highly desirable in the neighborhood and throughout St. Paul. But there's been no strong understanding of this as a sacred place of burial. Indigenous people don't feel welcome, and they are not allowed to care for their ancestors in private or in a way that they feel comfortable. The site is listed on the National Register, in the National Register of Historic Places as a park. And it does mention archaeological sites and mounds, but it's listed as a historic park because the park is 150 years old. Makes a problem. Okay, so in 2017, the city of St. Paul planned to add a splash pad to the park that already had playgrounds, picnic shelters, trails, and a lot of people walking dogs. A Dakota resident of the neighborhood protested, and the Prairie Island tribe and elders of the 4 Minnesota Dakota tribes worked with the city to determine a better approach. Funding for the splash pad project was diverted to the cultural landscape study, and that's where we came in and started our work. All right, so the cultural landscape study, we were really, really privileged to be part of a team. Quinn Evans led the team, but included a firm called Allies, which is an indigenous media firm, 10 by 10, who are landscape architects and urban planners in Minneapolis, 4 Minnesota Dakota tribes, the Prairie Island community, the Lower Sioux Indian community, the Upper Sioux community, and the Shakopee Metawakan Indian community, as well as the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin and the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. And local residents, the State Historic Preservation Office, the Office of the State Archaeologist, and all of us came together to address a big question. Do I need to read it? You guys can read it, right? Okay. So, yeah. So how do you address that question? We started by listening. We listened to Indigenous advisors, we listened to community members, we listened to the city and, you know, what issues they had with taking care of things. And we conducted a series of public and small group meetings and listening sessions. We also created an advisory group, and then we worked with the TIPOs of the tribes in an Indigenous advisory group. So we had many different things kind of going on at once. And I think one of the critical things that happened, which seems to happen in most of these projects, at some point there's a request made that seems impossible to honor. And in several projects now this has happened. And when that happens, we have been so fortunate to have built trust with our client and with the people we're working with to be able to honor those requests. And the amazing thing in this case, it was the request to wait, to pause the project until a cemetery was formally delineated in this location. And I remember sitting in the meeting, and Maura Rockcastle is the founder of 10 by 10, and she was sitting across the room from me, and we were in a big circle, and there were some tribal members who were really feeling like we couldn't move forward with this project without that delineation. And I myself felt like the delineation was important, but for the project, I didn't feel like it mattered a whole lot because we were already looking so far beyond anything they would delineate that I felt like it could even possibly constrain our work once we had that delineation. But Maura and I looked across the room at each other, and I was like, we need to stop. And she was like, we need to stop. And we looked over at Bianca, who was our project manager from the city. We both looked at her. She had already seen both of us, and she shook her head, and she said, we'll find a way. So the project went on hold for about 4 or 5 months. And it was so interesting because the OSA, the Office of the State Archaeologist, worked with the TIPOs, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. When I say TIPO, that's who I'm talking about. They did that for several months, and then they came back and said, we think you need to start the project back up because we can't put a boundary around this cemetery. Remember, I mentioned to you houses were built on it. Parts of mounds are like spread out underneath the highway. Like, to put a boundary on it, they felt like was not going to be an appropriate approach. And so they came back to us and said, let's start the project back up because we need to figure out what needs to happen in the future. So if we had pushed forward, like our schedule, our budget, and our scope of work, and possibly our client and everyone else in the room wanted us to do, we would have lost like the most important and most valuable moment in that project. So don't be afraid to tell your client, to help your client learn from what you know. Help them when you can. Let's see. So we did start up the project again, and we learned so much. So we had an interdisciplinary team that conducted very rigorous research to provide a basis for a shared understanding amongst diverse project participants. So what do I mean by that? I mean, like we created what we call part 1 of the CLR, which is, I call it baseline documentation, and that information then was used to present to all these different groups so that when we started the conversation about how we move forward, there was a grounding of foundational information where we were all starting together, right? So this is just a small example of one piece of that information that you're seeing on the screen. But the resulting study presents a very comprehensive framework for acknowledging the sacred site and the living indigenous people whose ancestors are buried there, while protecting, preserving, and emphasizing the unique heritage of the location, strengthening appreciation of American Indian heritage, improving environmental sustainability and resilience to climate change, and fostering understanding through physical transformation of and messaging within the landscape. Where am I at? Okay. Okay, so how do we do that? One of the most important things that everyone who works with me knows is that we have to have a vision. We have to have a vision from the beginning, and it has to be a vision that all of us can like put our hearts and souls into, because that's going to be our North Star as we move forward and make hard decisions during the process. So the vision for Indian mounds, the cultural landscape study, was guided by Mitakuwe Iwasi, and that is a Dakota word which means all is one. And when I talked about all is one before, and you saw that diagram with like the stars and the mounds and the cave and the birds and the people, that was a diagram that we created to try to communicate what we were hearing them say, Mitakuwe Iwasi, okay? So the vision was to be guided by Mitakuwe Iwasi, reflecting the interconnectedness of people, land, water, sky, animals, and plants, to provide a place of reverence, remembrance, and healing in a way that protects, honors, and acknowledges the sacred place of burial. We followed that up with goals that focus on protection of the sacred site, identification and preservation or restoration of important characteristics, guidance toward the desired condition of the mounds, increased understanding and respect of the sacred burial ground, relatives and ancestors who are here, identification of appropriate experiences or ways people use the land here, and then establishment of a partnership between the city and the tribes to guide use and care of the site. And that was one thing we knew early on needed to happen, and when we paused the project, we did ask the city to work with the tribes to get that partnership in place while we were waiting for the cemetery delineation. It didn't get fully in place, but the relationship really got more established and more solidified. So the treatment plan identifies strategies addressing partnership, experience, messaging, and condition to ensure that the vision is consistently applied across the site. The integration of native and culturally significant plants, physical messaging cues, artful interventions, and signage are designed to bring deeper understanding to place. 3 phases build toward the long-term vision of the landscape and relationships associated with it. Each phase establishes changes to the physical landscape, strengthens relationships, and conveys the message that this is a sacred burial ground through a stepped approach to build understanding of the sacred site and inspire people who come here to behave with respect. Key to the transformation of the landscape is the establishment of a threshold of native plants and messaging cues to acknowledge the sacred site, conversion of mown areas to native plant communities, removal of impactful elements, and reduction of pavement and vehicular access. In each phase, the native plants are extended further across the landscape, and eventually the playground, picnic shelters, and associated activities, and hopefully even a big section of the road are relocated. I guess the road would be removed, not relocated. But to help the public understand the need for change, the project scope included an interpretation plan, and our tribal advisors protested. Their cemetery was not a place to be on display for the entertainment of others. They suggested more appropriate messaging. The messaging plan presents key messages of respect and honor, Mitakuwe Wasin, Dakota land, power of place, geologic time, and the ecosystems of Imanisha Ska to build a better understanding of the site. The messages are integrated into the landscape in a variety of ways, and this was what we called immediate acknowledgement. So these messages took existing features in the landscape and added to them in like fast and inexpensive applications so that acknowledgement of this as a cemetery could happen as soon as possible with, while plans were getting into place to move forward with more changes. These applications help connect people to stories, sensory experiences, and new perspectives to help them embrace a world view where edges, hard lines, and delineations do not exist. Helping to dissolve the idea that the place of burial ends where the neighborhood begins, because it doesn't. The City of St. Paul is forming a partnership with the tribes to guide future decision-making. Actually, they have formed that. And the city and tribes have indicated that the project has great value to direct the future of the landscape and has been a successful first step in bringing together tribal representatives and city staff in development of an appropriate vision for the future of the site. If you are in Minneapolis for the ASLA convention, the immediate acknowledgement and interpretive panels should all be in place. There's one more that's really, really amazing that supposedly is going to get put in place next week. So we're really looking forward to that. And parts of the planting are getting have been seeded and the next phase of planting is coming up. So we're still kind of in phase one, but it's really inspiring to see things happening quickly. And I think that's like another important lesson that I've learned from that, and that is that if you can, once you've done something where you're bringing people to the table, you're asking them to talk about things that are really painful for them and hard, if there is any way to find an approach to do something immediately so that they can see something is happening, it is so important to give them that affirmation that the work that they're doing, especially because most communities who have not been at the table in the past for planning for their own places have had moments where they have been asked for information, and then that information, they haven't gotten any feedback on it. And it happens over and over and over again, and it becomes just an unfortunate cycle that's really painful. So I've got a couple of links, and I'll apologize because some of them, when I click them, and they didn't turn into an URL, but if you type in the words, you're going to get to these places. And the ones I wanted to point out to you, so the first two are from the Cultural Landscapes website that I shared earlier. The third one is a guide to cultural landscape reports, which is sort of like the basis for a lot of the work that we do, although it does need some spiffing up. And then guidelines for the treatment of cultural landscapes. And then the last one for the Indian Mounds Project during the pandemic. I'm so proud of my firm because we got a PPP loan during the pandemic, and we used that loan to hire more interns than we'd ever hired before. And then we kind of looked at some of our projects and said, how can we give something back to some of these communities? And we identified Indian Mounds as a place where gosh, if there could be a story map online where we could have it so people could kind of access some of this information in a, easily, wouldn't that be great? So we hired an intern, and she created that beautiful diagram. We have an intern diagram project that we do. So the beautiful diagram that when I was talking to you about the vision, our intern created that, and then she helped us. We kept her on board to work on the story map for Indian Mounds. So take a look for that. And I think if you just Google Indian Mounds and ArcGIS or story map, you'll get it. So that is what I've got for you today. I really hope that you've enjoyed what I've talked about. I really hope that I have converted at least 99% of you to become cheerleaders and absorbers of cultural landscapes, and that you will incorporate this into everything you do in the future. I want to thank you for the invitation to come and visit your campus and spend time with all of you. It's been just such a lovely day for me. So thank you so much. There's a couple of minutes if people do have questions. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it is an intense battle in the Twin Cities over many different situations. So the question, probably you guys didn't hear him, he was asking if there's been protest or pushback over telling stories that that people think of as fake truth or don't want told. And that's absolutely the case. Here at Indian Mounds, after working on a few other projects, I think the tribal representatives and us and our partners have, there's been all different ways that and it's been interesting, depending on the client or the managing organization. I could revert really easily right now to Fort Snelling, but Google it. Google Fort Snelling at Bedote, and you will get a lot of harsh and angry accounts for the state wanting to rename that site and doing a whole nother project there that is actually really amazing as well. At Indian Mounds, we really started at the get-go with our project advisory team, included people from the neighborhood, people who live across the street from the mounds, basically people whose houses are, they know it, they're probably on mounds, right? And so also in their neighborhood, not everybody sees eye to eye, but important for you to know, the woman who first stopped that splash pad project, she lives in that neighborhood. She's Dakota. There are other Dakota people, and there is a Dakota immersion school that is in that neighborhood. So I think those things were helpful. I think it's a little bit like my neighborhood in Madison. People in that neighborhood want to consider themselves as very progressive, and so when they did begin to complain and like really lash out, it wasn't until they were really uncomfortable, right? Because they were really trying to keep their minds open. And one of the really powerful things that happened, we had several great community engagement events, and there were like these really lovely ladies who were even older than me who just came in every single time and demanded that we do it in lecture format. They really didn't like more like sitting in a circle or having stations or anything. They just could you just stand up there and do a presentation? That's what we're used to. So we did one of those too. But one of the things that was super important is the city, we worked with the tribes, and the city brought in some indigenous facilitators who are Dakota and who are really, really good about talking to people about the deep meaning of this place to them. And they're also, the city did an okay job, but the facilitators did a great job, and the tribal, especially the Tippos and Maggie and a couple of other people who are just fabulous, did this really great job of helping people, reassuring people that nobody was going to come and take their house away from them. Because honestly, I truly believe that hatred and that protest to positive change comes deeply from fear. And at a couple of other project sites I've worked with, we have had so much luck having people come together, bringing the tribal representatives and the people who are most concerned about what might happen together, and having a facilitated dialogue with them. I won't call it mediation, because it's not mediation, it's their dialogue. But what we have been able to do, if people are really angry and maybe so angry or so afraid that they're just going to blow up and not say what they mean, we offer to say it for them, which I know is something we shouldn't do, but we do it with them there. And we do it in a way so when they hear it from each other, they don't hear the words. When one of us stands up and says it as like the third party, they start to hear the words in a different way. So that's like one strategy. But this is not something that will ever be easy. And I hope I didn't make it sound like it was, because it's not easy. But I think every time we've had, it's been amazing to me, because I've been in a situation where I've had like the farming community at Blood Run just all of a sudden in a meeting were like attacking me, and the tribal representatives who had like attacked me for months stood up and were like, now hang on here. And and then they started saying, she's done all this, or this team has done all that, and they've looked at this from both sides, and so it's really interesting, because then those two started talking to each other, and it turned into a completely different dialogue. So you've got to be willing to, I do tell my team members and I tell my clients, when you feel so uncomfortable that you want to crawl under the table, we are starting our work. And until you feel that, we're probably not quite there yet, because I know it doesn't sound like fun, but you don't get change and comfort too. And I think that's like, one of those bits. But there's a lot. Anybody else? Question? Comment? Concern?
One comment I would like to make is that with the sign, I don't know if this seems a little weird, but I think what really stood out to me was really how we're all about creating like a sense of respect for it. And what I really like is the very, I wouldn't say cold, but very candid language that you see on a lot of the signage. And I feel like at a lot of other places they kind of try to make it seem kind of like fun or like family friendly. But I like how it's just so there, and it kind of makes it feel more like a museum. And then the tone completely changes. They're like, oh.
I'm supposed to learn something here, maybe?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be, learning.
Or maybe I should be behaving a little bit. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And just to be clear, all of this is temporary. It's not, this is like the stuff we're doing to make sure that we didn't finish this project and then have to wait 5 years or 10 years to get the funding to put in the new sign that says Indian Mound Cemetery. We couldn't easily just change that sign, and honestly, it's still formally a park. It had, you know, that there has to be a change for the city, but yeah. So, and the way the language is presented, it comes straight from the tribal representatives. So that, you know, they get all the credit for that. We and especially 10 by 10 worked on the messaging plan, worked like through the wording, the capital letters, the bold letters, the small letters, whether it's a message that's up high or down low, you know, all of that was thought through really carefully to kind of think about how will this affect people as they walk through here. Thanks for that. Anything else? It's 5 o'clock. People are tired. It's been a long day. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm over there, I'm looking at that song, and I'm singing those words, and I'm just like, ugh. So, were you ever in a situation you had to learn how to pronounce certain words? Or did you just not even try?
I've been trying today. Hopefully I haven't messed them up too bad. Yes. And so I will admit that I struggle with some of them. There's a few I've said today that I am comfortable with. And one of the things that really, you know, as designers, we're not going to be working with the same community. So every community you go into may have different, it may not be different language, but it may be a different style of communication. And part of what we have to learn to do in order to be able to communicate is to find ways to either learn how to understand that kind of communication, or in some cases learn some of the words, but also you really kind of have to set your ego aside and be willing to be humble and to say, you know what, I need your help. I don't know how to pronounce that, and you may have to say it many, many times. And I have found that that the people who are coming to the table are so dedicated and devoted to trying to affect change that they are incredibly patient with me, no matter how many times it takes. So sad, but true. Yeah. But Mtakwe Wasim, I still don't say it right, but they've all told me I say it good enough. And so, you know, it's like, yes, Brenda, you can say that in public because we don't think you're ever going to get any better at it. They never said that to me, but I know what they're thinking. Anything else, you guys? I encourage you all, I didn't put it up there, but Dorna knows the Alliance for Historic Landscape Preservation is an organization that is beloved to both of us, and it is an organization that's very small and has a conference once a year. We always have student scholars. We never have enough applying. I encourage all of you to consider applying and joining us. We will be in Toronto in, do we know when? Is it May? It's May. Okay, we'll be in Toronto in May, and I don't know where we're going after that, but it's a great organization. Yes.
For our organization, do you have anything that doesn't require me to go to Toronto?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, we'll.
Bridge.
No, we're so small. I mean, our organization, like the total number of people is probably about 100 right now. Usually our conference has about 40. It's one of the reasons it's a great place for students to come, because everyone who's been on the board is going to make sure that they meet you and have a meaningful conversation with you if you've not been to our conference before. And if you can't come to Toronto, do you know where we're going to be? 2025? Yeah. It's usually in the US. We're an international organization and we go usually 2 years US, 1 year Canada. But we couldn't go to Canada for so many years because of COVID that we have to go to Canada this year. It's got to happen. So. There's also a website. It's not the best website, but we're all volunteers, so yeah. Well, thanks, you guys. Good luck with your semester.